All right. So good evening to everybody. Welcome to another masterclass. Today's masterclass is about compliance in cybersecurity and some of its requirements. Our speaker today, Mr. Aditya Sarangapani, I've had a privilege to interview him at the beginning or the inception of Antwalk when we were doing videos. And he comes with a plethora of experience. So a brief introduction about himself. He currently manages the information security department with VFS Global. In addition to that, he's worked with big guns like Access Risk Consulting, TCS, and his total experience kind of stems for over a decade. In addition to that, he also has completed his engineering in mechanical engineering, and he is also a master's, an MBA in business management. The biggest highlight in his career, as far as concerned, cybersecurity is concerned, he comes with a plethora of certifications. Some of them, to name a few, would be the ASACA certifications, with the CISA ones, and also he has been involved with the cybersecurity governance bit of it for quite a few months and quite a few years. And he comes with a specialty around ISO 27001 and other compliance frameworks. It's a privilege to have someone like him amongst us today, and I can't wait for the session to start to have his knowledge shared with us. So if you guys have any questions, please start putting them in the chat. We have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the meeting. We'll definitely try to pick or answer 3 or 4 questions as far as we can. So without any further delay, I'd like you to give a warm welcome to our guest host today. Welcome, sir. Good evening. Once again, it's a pleasure to have you on board.
Evening, Kaushik, and everyone on the call. Thank you for attending, and thank you for the Antwalk team for coordinating all this to set up this masterclass. After the initial, as Kaushik said, the initial interviews, videos that we did about a year ago, and then expanding the program as they had promised when they approached me for the videos. It did take its time, but yes, I'm happy to see that the Antwalk team has grown it, as they wanted. Yes, maybe they did, optimize the process over time, but thanks for having me. So, so the topic today is, on compliance in cybersecurity. Okay, so compliance tends to get a secondary seat with the overall cybersecurity umbrella, and it is unfortunate because, when you look at a job description in compliance or governance, or rather in information security or cybersecurity, you see many job requirements on penetration testing, red team assessment, vulnerability management, so on. But the other side that you have with an information security team is a compliance. Understand that this compliance is from two angles, which you will see in my slide deck that I will be sharing as I go through the presentation. One is, obviously, most of the controls that you implement, are intended to manage the compliance. This compliance may not be purely IT. Yes, IT does play a big part, which is where you need to make the distinction between cybersecurity and information security and cyber compliance governance. You would have seen a plethora of nomenclatures everywhere, but I will just try to stitch them together during the session. Without further ado, let's start with first defining what these do. If I may just share my screen.
Sure, sir.
Yeah. Sure. Let's share the entire thing. Yeah, let me minimize that. Yeah, so this is what we will be discussing. As you can see, it's only about 5 slides or 6 slides for that matter, including the one for Q&A. So let's understand where cybersecurity and compliance are, what they are in terms of defining them, and then the subsequent slides will see how they're related to each other and why it is important. I did give you a brief preview in my introductory speech, but let's see. So cybersecurity essentially is the art, these are definitions that you get on the internet. The art of protecting networks, devices, data from unauthorized access or criminal use, and the practice of ensuring confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. if you have had to put the, the KRA, primary KRA for the cybersecurity or the information security team, in one line or one sentence, you'll say manage CIA, or the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information that is handled by the organization. Now, where does cybersecurity come in? As you can see in the in the definition, it is the information that is in your network, devices, all your IT systems for that matter, and protecting them. Ultimately, that is what cybersecurity is. And the other side, the information security, includes the ones in cybersecurity, but it includes the information that you have in, say, hard copies. And if I may touch it, by the one that is there in people's brains. I mean, not everything is protectable, obviously, directly. I mean, as in my training sessions, I do say that there is only so much I can do to see into what is going on in your brain. So, which is why you have guidelines in organizations saying that, whatever you come to know about the organization or what data you have as part of your normal job role, don't speak about it outside. Again, depends on the sensitivity of the information, which is a completely different topic in terms of how you're going to rate the information, how critical is it for the organization. The most critical, obviously, you will see many times it is a reference to personal data, which is protected by law in many countries, including the forthcoming law in India. It is still a bill, but it's not yet been passed by Parliament. But China recently is, excuse me, recently passed their cybersecurity or personal data protection law, which will come into force from 1st of November. And that is where compliance comes in. You need to understand, I mean, privacy, obviously, but privacy is, to some extent, is related to compliance, is where it is important to understand what is the requirement, how are you going to implement it. Now, as you will say, okay, let's leave it at that. I will give you the, as we go further into the linkages, you will understand better. And compliance, if you look at the simple dictionary meaning, it means the act of conforming, acquiescing, or yielding to something. In this case, as we will see in the next slide, what do you need to comply to or conform to? Now, why do we need compliance? Because what happens is, if you don't comply with these requirements, you can have legislative breaches, that you have cyber laws, so you have legal action on you. It is a significant business risk. As you will see in the remaining dots, there is a reputation loss. If I were to ask you a simple question, forget you are in a cybersecurity field or trying to get into compliance or anything. If you know that any business takes your data and sells it to someone else, would you really trust them with your data as an individual? No, I mean, most likely the answer is no, because it takes a lot to manage your data. And as you can see, the image that you take, you may have built a reputation of 20 years, but just one slip up can ruin it. That's where the business risk and the reputation loss comes in. Financial loss, obviously, other than if you are fined by the authorities, you need to pay the fines. You are actually spending money to respond to that incident, which causes a breach. Again, coming to loss of customer confidence, as I said, you would not trust the organization which lost your data. And business interruption is something that people don't take into account. What happens is, once you have an incident, you are literally pulling people from the front end who are actually dealing or delivering your business to, respond to that incident. Till you get a formal investigation done. So maybe you are standing people down, you are, pulling people from doing their normal day-to-day work, which means the business is interrupted. That is what the impact of compliance, non-compliance can be. Now, which is why it forms a very important part. These are two images, just for the fun of it and to give a break. So on the left, if you see the right in armor, it say you have defense in depth, you have patch systems, you have 24/7 monitoring, you have annual compliance auditing, you have experience in IT and security team. The flaw is the eye hole, which you need. Otherwise, the person in the armor cannot see. And someone just clicks on a phishing email. And all these measures are gone for a toss. For example, if you have been following the news, the latest vulnerability is on the Exchange server. People have been taken. And on the other side is a special for COVID, which is why you see the doctor, nurse, pharmacist, everything. But your entire IT setup, including this one, is to the guys at Zoom and the other IT networks, including your internet service provider who've been working. And as you can see, it's just comic relief, but you can see the number of wires that go through to ensure that everyone is connected, and it works 24/7. So someone is, and maybe not there physically, but someone is monitoring that. Let's go to the next one. Here is where you come into, why compliance and cybersecurity come into focus. Let's look at what are the compliance requirements on an organization. You have again, these vary with the where your organization is based, where you're doing business, whose data you're using as part of your business. So GDPR is one of the laws which is extraterrestrial. So the moment you touch the PI data of any EU citizen anywhere in the world, you have to comply with it. India IT Act also has a, it is not a cyber security compliance per se, but it does put in force a few requirements that you need to manage in terms of what kind of encryption you can use. As an experience, you could say that if you are going to operate a call center, you need to get an approval with a, I believe that's changed, but earlier even if it is for your own business, so that you have to mention that you are a call center, you have to get the registration done with the Department of Telecom. It includes a, for a up to 100-seater, it was a earnest money of 5 crores that you have to maintain with DOT, which will be this one if you don't comply with the telecom regulations. IT, telecom, yes, you use telecom to do, or rather you use IT too. Now you have phones. One of the requirements, and if you look at the basic law that says, which is very confusing, is that the IT or the Telecom Act, the TRAI Act, has one sentence which says that the user of this telecom service will not bypass the revenue of the authorized telecom operator. Which means if you are going to divert a STD call, if say for example like an app, someone wants to call your call center and they are based in Delhi, whereas the call center is in Mumbai, the STD call cannot be bypassed. You have to route that call through Delhi, or you give the 5 crore this one. The same, and it is more pronounced when there is an international call, because you might have read in the papers where many call centers were pulled up because they were bypassing the, allowing the client to, make a local call, but then using their network, the ISP network to make a call to the US, for example, which means you are bypassing the ISD revenue that the telecom operator normally would have. India has that. Russia has the FZ-152, which has been there for about 15 years now, if I'm not mistaken. It actually specifies what kind of software you can use at the antivirus, at the firewall level. And only those authorized ones can be used if you're going to protect, sensitive data from a data protection perspective. Now that causes a lot of this one because, for large organizations which also operate in Russia, your normal antivirus cannot be used in the machines that are done in the Russian Federation. Belarus has a similar kind of rule. For example, BFS Global, given its global scale, so I do know that we operate in both these countries. One of the questions that was asked is, we have the accounting data, no personal data, accounting data for our operations in Belarus. But we need to encrypt it, but the Belarusian government doesn't show explicitly state which encryption algorithm we can use, which means technically you can't encrypt the data, even if you're taking a backup. So how do you get around this? I mean, so these are the questions you will be asked as a compliance professional. Yeah, there are various, like with cybersecurity, there are various aspects of which ones you want to act in. You want to specify in the legal and regulation side, which is HIPAA is again, or you want to do in the overall compliance, which is not only cybersecurity. So you might be a cybersecurity compliance manager, but you might be with the overall compliance and governance team in the organization which deals with all the regulations. Simple example, I mean, even if you're going for something like ISO 27001, one of the questions is, do you actually have the right to do business in the country? I.e., in India, it is called the Shop and Establishment Act. Other countries have their own business licensing procedures, which is a legal requirement. It's not a cybersecurity requirement, but it is part of their information security management system. Okay, so you understand how these impact. And HIPAA is for healthcare providers in the US. SOX is a financial management. I mean, it's intended to ensure that the financials that they're declaring, it's about 20 years old now. It came the background of the Enron collapse in 2001 or 2002. But what it states, especially section 404, is that the management, i.e. the CEO and the CFO, should ensure that there are appropriate checks to ensure the accuracy of the financial statements. And they need to sign off on it, because then they're criminal. Once they sign off, they're criminally liable. That is where SOX comes. Privacy Shield. This is an interesting one. Privacy Shield is essentially for US companies which cater to EU. So earlier you have something called the safe harbor. So US company which is catering to EU citizens can store data in the US, which is as part of the safe harbor regulation that the EU recognizes. But what happened when Edward Snowden said that the NSA was looking at all data, they had all the technology. The courts in the EU said that no, the safe harbor is no longer valid, because the NSA can force any US operator to share their data, because it's a regulatory thing, and EU does not want EU citizens' data to be shared with any governmental agency other than themselves. So they came up with something called a privacy shield. So as a transition, which too, as you would, there is something called SCREMS 2, which too was challenged and it has been struck down by a court. So technically, if you are a US company operating in the EU, you cannot share, EU residents' data into the US, which means you are going to put up a data center in the EU, which is additional cost. How are you going to, it's just one website you have. How are you going to decide which data is going which data center? And with the cloud, it's, it makes it easier, but yes, there are requirements around it. Then there are industry requirements, which are not laws per se, but unless you comply with them, you will not get any business. Chief among them is PCI DSS, which is when you are going to handle any card data or monetary data, i.e. credit card, debit card, unless you comply with it, and the fines are, this is run by the card companies, i.e. MasterCard, Visa, and Amex, and others as well, but primarily MasterCard and Visa. So if you don't comply, even if you have only a swipe machine, you can be hit with fines, which which reduces your ability to deal with cards. So any payment, then you can't use cards. So how do banks help you? They give you the the swipe machine. It's a relationship, because banks have better systems as opposed to a small mom and pop store which just takes credit card data. But yes, you still need to comply with the regulation. Even for organizations which do take finance payments online, but they transfer to a payment gateway provider. So from a vendor management, you are transferring your risk to a payment gateway provider who is supposed to be PCI DSS certified. But that doesn't mean you should not be there are reduced compliance requirements. So you have to be, what you would do if you're transferring is basically a self-assessment questionnaire B. Again, there are variations in what kind of business you do, what kind of data you take, and so on. It also means that you need to protect the card data, because the moment you lose the card data, you are in a whole lot of soup, because yes, you will be fined by the authorities, IAPs, you will be fined by the card companies, you lost your reputation, and you by law, you're supposed to provide what is called a protection for payments or fraud payment protection, which costs you a lot of money. And not all of this happens on IT. If people go back to Target, which is a US-based retailer, they lost a lot of data. And so what did it cost them? They lost their 2 CEOs, their CFO. They had to appoint a CISO who also was fired and could never work in the industry again. And it happened in 2012. They're still paying for it. So their operational loss over the past 9 years or so is much higher than what money they actually lost by this one. And why was that done? Because the provider of the HVAC AC system for their stores, which are fairly large, if anyone is in the US and visited their stores, The CEO of that small company was sent a phishing email. As you could, if you go back to the image of that one phishing email, and with that phishing email, the attackers were able to control the HVAC system, and through that they could, because if you remember, if you understand how a card payment is made, when the person at the store brings the Bluetooth-enabled card machine to your desk, especially if it's a restaurant, there is a Bluetooth connection, so they could tap into that and fetch all the data as it was going. So PCI DSS target could no longer accept cards for a very long time, till they could put in a remedial measures which affected the business, and they're still paying in terms of identity protection. ISO 27001 is a well-known standard. Again, many companies whom you want to engage with do ask for it. At least if you're not already certified, at least be compliant to it. ISO 27701 is a kind of add-on to the base ISO 27001, but it is primarily around privacy control, privacy of data privacy management. SSAE 18 is again your SOC 2 reports and so on, which if you are the vendor to someone, they might ask you as part of their vendor assessment. Now then you have contractual obligations. So you have the NIST framework, you have FISMA, you have FedRAMP, which are basically US government owned. But unless you are certified to that, you cannot take up a contract with any US government agency. Now there are a lot many. Again, these are, when you get into the actual agreement, there are so many controls that you can put in. Just to give you an example, with any vendors that we have with VFS, especially those who handle PI data on our part, we have a separate data protection addendum. On that, as the information security team, I actually look at one section to force, and it is documented because it's an agreement of what kind of controls you have to protect the data you're handling on our behalf. Because for us, it is a rollback, because we work with governments who have mandated a certain level of privacy for the applicants who are applying for visas and other services. If I'm going to roll it down to my vendors, I need to put in place those controls. It might be something as simple as, a courier vendor. What are you going to share with the courier vendor? Your name, the applicant's name, the address, email, and maybe phone number, but that is still PI data. How are you going to protect it? How are you going to enforce? And the last but not the least, again, these are organizational policies which will be governed by all these laws that are applicable to you, and a baseline so that you are compliant to it. Because as you can see, the impact of not complying or having compliance failures can be pretty huge. Ultimately, as I said earlier, these compliance requirements are enforced by cybersecurity controls, which is why cybersecurity comes into the picture. And the IT team relies on the cybersecurity team, because if you are going to comply with the from an overall information or cybersecurity team, the IT team will tell you, please let me know what controls need to be implemented, and then we can work with you to ensure that it is implemented. But they will not come up with what needs to be implemented. So you are essentially going to have to give them what needs to be implemented, maybe guide them in how it can be implemented. Again, depends on how good your IT team is. So those are contractual requirements, and if there are failures, the compliance side of things does take a hit. Okay, going on. So what do just going on the same subject, what do cybersecurity controls impact? You have threat management, so which is basically what you get as feeds from various sources. There will be indicators of compromise, which you will maybe put into your various monitoring devices, so that if any of those rules are triggered, you are alerted and you can take suitable action. You have encryption policies. What kind of encryption do you want? Some are driven by contracts. So your supplier or your client might say that if you're going to share data with me, these are the requirements. How are you going to implement it? Only for this. Tool again, same with the tools and solutions. Whether it's encryption policy, threat management, it depends on what tools and solutions you have. As you can see, I'm treading into the vulnerability side of things, but essentially compliance acts as a checker for everything that you've done. Incident management. Okay, where does this come into place? Because irrespective of what kind of controls you have, as you were to learn from other, this one who taught you the basics of the information security or cyber security. If you do have an incident, how are you going to respond? That is a documentation you need to do. And again, adding to that the other SOPs that you might want to know in terms of what is your access management policy, what is your overall InfoSec policy, what is your uh, logging policy or management policy. And so, I mean, especially if you're going for something like an ISO 27001 certification, how do you respond? How do you, analyze what is the criticality of that incident? How do you escalate up the chain so that if it is a very large impact, you will need to tell the management, so which is very, and you typically become the messenger, so you can get shot. BAU management, again related, ensure that things are working in BAU. Essentially is business as usual, on an ongoing basis, so that you are basically compliant till an incident hits you. Then you can see what, as I gave you an example, legal and compliance agreements, it is both ways. So any agreements that you sign with your vendors, you might have information security guidelines, which legal team will probably ask you in a fairly mature organization, is this sufficient? Again, tie that to the next point, which is vendor or supply chain risks. Have you done a risk assessment of the vendor? No, so that will be based. What you're asking the vendor to do is based on what is there in the agreement. So you need to have that kind of foresight. Supply chain risks, it is not only your vendor, but the vendor's vendor. As people would have known with the SolarWinds, which is a monitoring platform. So you have a SOC service which is using SolarWinds to monitor. But when SolarWinds itself was infected, an infection flowed to your own systems. So is that a risk to you? Yes. Is that a compliance risk? Possibly. Excuse me. Vulnerability management, of course, is your BAU, this one, but then you need to be aware of what are the vulnerabilities. Can you push out the patch in time? Again, that depends on your IT team. Or can the patch be applied? Because, by applying your patch, if your business function fails, you can't apply that patch directly. What is the workaround you're going to put in place? Again, comes from the information security team. Training and awareness, again, goes back to the simple thing, going to the image that we had a couple of slides back. Don't click on any email or the links in the email, copy the email. So these training and awareness that you send to all your employees. Cyber insurance. Again, many companies think that, yes, we have cyber insurance. Any incident that happens, we will be protected. But now, as the market is maturing, insurers are always asking a lot of questions. What level of controls did you have? Are they effective? Did you test them? Especially now in the COVID-19 scenario, when many organizations did face ransomware, which saw the insurers pay out, which means it is bad for their business, which means they are increasing their level of scrutiny on what levels of controls you have, how do you manage it? Is someone actually looking at the data? From a cybersecurity perspective, you will find many organizations, we log everything, but is someone looking at the logs? Are you making sense of it? Where a SOC and SIEM system comes into play? That is your compliance requirement, because you need to monitor and then respond. It's not important that just collecting logs. That's it. Nobody's doing anything about it. You're just wasting storage space, which is a premium. Okay, so coming to the penultimate slide. So these are some compliance and governance rules that you can look at. I will not go through them, each one of them, but you do get a drift of what we've discussed. You can go. The first one is an analyst. Then each one of these have multiple levels. In my own role, I handle the InfoSec function, as Kaushik said at the top of this meeting. But information security itself is a function in the organization. So how do you ensure that the function itself is compliant? Because you may train all your users everything, but if you make the mistake yourself, you are held to a higher pedestal. That's it, Kaushik. Over to you. Actually, I finished my slides. Open for any questions.
All right, sure thing, sir. So guys, yes, you can start posting your questions in the chat. Meanwhile, I'm just going to take the screen sharing over, sir. And the thing that is I wanted to show majorly was all right. when it comes to our program, we are doing a 16-week program. We usually do a 12 weeks of core topics, and then we do about 3 weeks, 3 classes per week. One that runs on a Saturday, two that run on a Sunday. And then the idea for us is we do involve industry experts like Aditya sir, who come and be a part of a boot camp. And all of our classes are live classes. None of them are pre-recorded. For certain technicalities or conceptual terms, we introduce pre-reads usually before the class begins so that you get an idea of how things work. In addition to that, the most important things are the tools and the projects, because at the end of the day, whatever validates your skills in terms of cybersecurity, in addition to your conceptual learning, is getting these projects done. And currently, this is the price. This option needs to change. I'm so sorry. Ignore the EMI. The zero cost EMI is available, but then the course is priced at 49,999. So we deal with about 10 specific topics throughout the boot camp. We start with introduction to cybersecurity. We go to network security, cyber attacks, web application security, incident management. And if you see a line to every specific topic, there is a hands-on tool that we do. And in addition to these 5 topics, we also deal with digital forensics, governance and risk and compliance, identity and access management, cloud security, and threat intelligence. So the idea here is that we give you a 360-degree purview of what you want or what you need to learn about cybersecurity, because as Aditya sir said, it's a huge field, and to just have an idea about how things work is not just enough, but also need to understand how the tools work, how the environment works, and with the growing threat landscape, it is becoming more important for people to come up with the cybersecurity skills, and we try to also support you for placements as well. So I've shared the link on the chat window for our program. I'd request everybody to have a quick kind of look through the course. And also we're running a promotional discount today. And the discount URL has Aditya sir's URL in it. So it is like a discount that you get. So try to make use of this link as much as you can. All right. So guys, yes, the session is officially done from Aditya sir's end. Is there, if you have any sort of questions around the session or any sort of questions around cybersecurity, you can start posting them on the chat and I'll start reading them out. Though I'd like to start off my first question to sir today. So sir, we have dramatically seen a lot of increase in these cyber attacks in the past 3 or 4 months, especially these ransomware attacks. And despite a lot of compliance frameworks and standards being there, what are we potentially missing, would you think, in terms of defending these attacks?
So, I mean, you need to take a pragmatic view. Like I said, or, you would have heard this saying that, the hacker has multiple turns to try to attack you, but you are allowed only one failure and you're all done. As you can see in that image that I showed of the man in a knight's armor. The only chink in his armor is the hole for the, the slot for his eyes. If someone is able to get into that, that's where you're dead. Because, eye being part of the head is an important one. That's the extreme scenario, but yes, you need to ensure that your systems are, what are your exposures? That's a constant evaluation you need to look at. What a typical word you would use is your threat surface.
Yep.
If you're going to put in a new solution which is facing the internet obviously has a much larger threat surface. What are the protections you're putting on it? Again, that will depend on what kind of data you are processing using that particular system. On the other side, when you're talking to, say, your marketing folks, what data do you want from an IT system design perspective? What data do you want to collect from the applicant? Use everything. Now that presents 2 problems. One, you are, from a pure IT perspective, you're looking at storage. More data means more storage, which is okay in the times of cloud, you can do it, but earlier it was a genuine problem. Now with the privacy law, especially if it is sensitive or PI data, I'll check with PI data, but sensitive has similar connotations. You have more data you can lose. If something goes wrong, you're going to lose everything. I mean, just to give you and it is, and you should never be the framework that, no, impenetrable, nobody can come in, nobody can get in. So, I mean, you can find a risk in everything. And if you could look at the core risk management, this one, I'm currently at home. Okay, I have a laptop which is connected to the internet. So there is a certain risk level to it. It is protected by the firewall and so on. Let me say I want to reduce that risk. I will take a machine, laptop, desktop, whatever. Not have an internet connection on it. It is completely air gapped, as you might say. What are the risks to it? You do require power, which means a spike. I mean, if you get a spike in the power system and you don't have maybe a circuit breaker or a fuse to control that, you pretty much can burn your machine, which is as useless as ransomware attack machine, or maybe worse. Same, you say I will not. I mean, I'll just keep a box, no power as well. It is useless. But at the same time, how do you know the roof, in the room where you're keeping it is not going to fall down? Yes, it is a strong building. Maybe it is, whatever. So, you can always go deeper and deeper into what risks can be there. But then what is your level of acceptance of that risk? And so your control measures will appropriately need to be managed. You cannot aim for zero risks. That's kind of, any cybersecurity person will tell you that if you're looking at zero risks, you are probably fooling yourself.
Got it, sir. We have a question from Vanessa. So she is currently working in identity and access management, and she wants to move forward in her career and get into compliance. Where should she begin?
So Vanessa, I'll just answer your direct. So you by identity and access management, I'll take the second part of it. So you manage the maybe the access to the systems. But have you have you gone further? I mean, I'm just giving you a step up. Maybe analyze what kind of access is frequently used. If you have the rights, can you reformulate the roles in the system so that your work is reduced? That's one way of not going further, but analyzing. Then you understand what are the compliance risks, because typically from an access management system, the risk that you have is extra access to a person. So, and you cannot always, I know it is very difficult for the IT or the InfoSec team to decide what level of access a person needs. That, the manager of that person actually requesting access will be the best place. But you need to look at, from a pragmatic view, do they really require this access? To the extent that you should be able to challenge. It may not always be possible, but that's one way. So what you're doing is essentially to ensuring compliance by managing the access. That's one access. And obviously then you can extend into other areas of compliance, again, depending upon your, what you want to do. Because one of the reasons why compliance doesn't have a very high rating, although it has a deep impact, other than the fact that it's not recognized, is that it sometimes gets very, boring. You're going to read so many agreements that which clauses where, for example. I face this with my colleagues as well. When I say that when I delegate sectors, it's a 200-page agreement. You're looking for one line that is there. Unfortunately, so you have to figure out where that is. Is that applicable for that particular vendor, or whatever is that agreement about? You are understanding how the organization is working, how it will impact the organization. You need to understand what are the risks to it. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but then these are the little steps you can take, and so you can go into full compliance work. The other side, as I said, mentioned agreements. You can look at legal. If you go back to my last slide, you've seen that there is a identity access management per person. You can go into managing the access management completely as maybe as a team leader. So from one application, you go to multiple applications, and then to the many companies do have an access management team who manages access to property. The other side is, what about the access that you guys already have? You have administrative access to what level? Do you require full admin? Maybe if it comes to you for approval, that is the kind of queries you'll need to ask. Why do they require that, especially when it's privileged access, that level of privileged access? And again, if you're designing a privileged access management solution, you need to be clear of who requires what access and when. Those are the kind of solutions you can work on. One aspect that you will realize is many of these projects are not turn on a switch. They are a complete project which means you need to have project management skills as well. You also need to have skills to, if you are especially going to give bad news to people, how to convey it, which is, as you saw in the program, soft skills are important. Stakeholder management is important. Those are a few areas you can look at, depending on where your interest lies. Hope that answers your question, Vanessa.
All right. So we have another question, is that we have a lot of free certifications for firewalls and network security. Is there any sort of free training certification or any free course that can be available for GRC or ISO 20001?
Yeah, there are, I may not say free courses, there will be enough resources. Again, maybe free, maybe paid, whatever, but the, again, as I said, it tends to be boring because every situation is different. So just to give you an example, not, degrading the people who manage firewalls, is that when you know this rule needs to be implemented, yes, that's it. You know how to, depending upon there are only so many types of firewalls that are there in the world. But with the compliance, there are so many gamut. How are you going to interpret that? That is more important, which is why, even going through a course will provide you the basics, but then it is dependent on how you analyze the situation. Just to give you an example from a pure risk management, non-IT, this one. So you do know, of course, before the pandemic, there, people did travel by trains, especially in Mumbai, which is now only now for the past maybe 10 days allowed for fully vaccinated people after almost 1.5 years. But there are organizations which run, because if you are caught by the ticket checker without a ticket, you need to pay a fine. So there are organizations which did do that. Say that you travel without ticket, you have to pay a monthly fee because it's a group. If you do get fined, pay the fine, give us a receipt, we'll reimburse your money. The reason for that, is a risk assessment saying that unless you're extremely unlucky, you will spend more on the daily ticket or the monthly pass than a one-off fine that you might need to pay. It is not exactly ethical. Again, that's another aspect with compliance, but is it a risk management scenario? Yes, because you're saving money. So that is where someone needs to think of such, I won't say loophole, but gaps that you can use, because ultimately both from a compliance and cybersecurity, you are not someone who's going to be seen as someone who blocks everything, which means you lose control of everything. So that is where you need to be careful of what kind of courses you do. But yes, you can do up reading. There are enough adequate resources available, but then you will learn as you come in place with different scenarios.
Got it, sir. So we have another question from Rohit. So SOC requirements contain all expertise, including VAPT, SIM, and GRC. Seems a bit challenging to direct which internal field must be first chosen. What will be the way forward to focus, being a security administrator?
No, see, again, from a SOC perspective, what are you doing? If you want to drill down to the basics of what a SOC role does, again, depending upon whether you're L1, L2, L3, your level of focus will change. But what you're looking for, you're collating your logs, trying to make useful analysis out of that to find out what are the threats to the organization. That is your basic. Now, once you go up, GRC is ultimately will recommend that you need to have a SOC with this level of monitoring. These are the critical things that need to be monitored because they are your primary this one. It makes sense to invest in a SOC to monitor those things. Okay, that is where GRC ties in. So ultimately, what you are going to do is, if you are going to be the GRC manager, you need to maybe look at what your SOC is looking at. If whether it's in-house or outsourced, that's what is the scope of work of the SOC? What kind of logs are they looking at? Are they really critical assets? And what kind of, if you're evaluating the SOC vendor themselves, what kind of intelligence are they bringing to the table? Because just analyzing logs, looking for correlations, that is done automatically by the SIM system, if you're assuming you have a decent one. But are you able to bring something more to the table? Who's going to do that analysis? That will come as you grow up, maybe at the end. Someone dealing with the L3 or what the SOC is delivering. Not at the L1 level where you say, yes, there is an alert, can you raise it? Even if you are at the L1 level, you know this, you get this kind of log when someone logs in. So are you going to raise that as an alert once you've been told? Do you have a database of known, I won't say known issues, but things which you're supposed to disregard, but at the same time keep it at the back of the mind, because if something deviates slightly, you need to raise it as an incident. We've had issues where our SOC, we have independent monitoring systems where our SOC failed to detect, or rather they open the detect internally, but the L2 guy said that this is not an issue and closed it. But whereas my other monitoring team, which I monitor as an InfoSec professional, raised it, and I actually looked into it, and so it was, it was my vulnerability assessor, but at least I was able to raise it, ask them a question: was this you? Was this your IP? Because it looks like you're doing a simple thing like a port scan. Are you really looking for someone? Is this really your system? And if the IP is your system, was there really a scan running at that time? Or is someone spoofing the IP as seen by a logging system? So those are few opportunities you can look at in the immediate thing, and then take it from there. Like I said, there is no fixed path that you can go, because it varies. Again, if you move to a different country, the regulations change. And it need not be always your IT system. As you said, you need to have a wider mind in terms of other forms of data. I mean, just to give you an example, when we were, before GDPR came into existence about 3 years ago, we did an assessment what is our compliance level? Are we ready for GDPR? One of the things we found as the HR team was maintaining all the CVs, the assessments and all in their safe in the office, which was exposed, which means you're literally playing with the PI data for all your candidates. Is there a destruction policy for that? And how do you ensure that it is destroyed? IT systems you can put as scheduled task. What about your paper copies? I mean, let me take a simple system, not to scare you. If you're applying for a job, what happens to your CV? Especially if you're going to send one by post, a hard copy. So you should probably read the privacy notification. How long are they going to retain it? Who's going to have access to it? I mean, those are from an individual's point of view, but those, because your CV has what? Your name, your your work experience, your qualifications, your contact details, i.e. your email and phone number. And some people go ahead and put on the passport number, date of birth, everything. So yes, so if that falls into the wrong hands, how are they going to manage it? I mean, are you going to trust an organization which doesn't protect your CVs and doesn't destroy? Why do you require CVs which were sent to you about 3 years ago? What is it? Because that data would have changed. You're not going to rely on that anymore. Even if you want to look at that same person again. So what is your So these are the things you can institute in your. Although I've given you an outside-in view, but you need to look at internally how we are going to implement those. Again, compliance to the law. Some requirements you need to maintain hard copies for so many years, especially say tax documents. How are you going to store them? And how are you going to protect? Because they are, say, tax means there are financial data in it. How are you going to protect it?
All right. So we have another question. Having 1 year of experience in information security, is there a possibility to get into compliance?
Yes, you are. I mean, I don't know who that person is, but what is your role that you've been doing? Are you maintaining your, again, we've been saying information security is a very vast field. There are so many things you can do. You want to move to a compliance, look at these areas where you're looking at by building value in what data you're handling as part of your role in information security. We can do one-on-one, understand what are the views. I don't know exactly what this person is doing. You say 1 year in information security. I've had, in the 16 years, I've done audits. I've actually implemented an IT system. I've actually managed the function itself, building, right from policy procedures. ISO 27001, yes, I managed a certification program. There are a couple of others I managed for PFS as well. various requirements from both from a technical and process and procedure requirement. So this brings me to an important point in cybersecurity, which people focus on. I mean, sorry, I didn't put it on my deck, but your cybersecurity program or an information security program is based on 3 pillars, if you might put it. One is your people, one is your process, and one is your technology. By your firewall, antivirus, web application firewall, NIPS, IDS, SOC, everything will probably come into the technology build. What about your people? What about the processes? They are important, because if one of them fails, your entire information security program is on the wrong, is on unstable foundation. Sorry, that's not a straight answer, because there are variations you can look at. You can look at moving on more compliance related role, which would be a natural development from what you've been doing on a day-to-day basis. Or you can look at completely different. Maybe you're looking at another team who manages this compliance, which sometimes will happen as you grow in the organization, as you get more experience. Because, as I said, compliance is not something that you can learn on day one. You can read up what are the laws. Interpreting them requires experience, and that's sometimes not. It takes time. And so people lose focus, and it doesn't interest them so much. But yes, it's an interesting field if you get into it, and it's again based on what your interests are.
Right. And so I think the last question that I've received here is, with an SAP experience, is it possible to transition into cybersecurity?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
With a SAP experience, is it possible to transition to cybersecurity?
Yes, but what are the controls you've implemented on SAP? Again, depending upon what module you have. You have the HRMS module, you have the finance module, you have the, if I'm not mistaken, SAP also has a GRC and especially module. What are you managing? So now you know how SAP works. Any of these modules. What are the controls that you are going to implement on your SAP system? Basics. Who has access to which module? Okay. Hi, Venkata. Again, as Venkata, to answer your specific question on the chat, IAM. What are you access? From an IAM perspective, what are you managing? Let me ask you that simple question.
He is from PAM.
Yeah, CyberArk. Okay. So, are you, your first level, I assume, yeah, I understand what CyberArk and privilege accounts mean. You are managing privilege accounts, but have you ever looked at looking at who requires what access? I mean, one level is managing the CyberArk system itself. No, yes, exactly. Thanks, Venkata. You are managing the CyberArk system itself, which means you get a ticket. I mean, just to put it very simply, you allocate that user, that level of access to what was, device or application or server or whatever it is. That is your day-to-day role. But yeah, okay. Protect credentials, yeah, all that's okay.
Venkata, can you try? Can you unmute yourself and then speak instead of just typing it one by one? That will be a bit easy.
Yeah, Venkata.
Yeah, hi Aditya. Very nice to talk. The main thing is I'm administrator of CyberArk and managing all the privilege accounts in an organization. I can rotate the credentials and user management, platform management, session management, and onboarding of the accounts. So many things in the PAM area.
Okay, let me answer your question. You are doing this, but I assume that this will be based on some ticket or a request that comes in to your desk, right? And then you enable it. And the other part in terms of rotating, managing sessions and managing rotating credentials is part of your SOP. But there was someone who created that SOP, right? Or why do you require to give that access? I'm just giving you food for thought here. Why does this person require access?
Yeah, because they are the authorized users to access those target missions. So that's what, yeah.
Why are they authorized?
Because they are from the organization.
So
they need to access that privilege accounts without going to attack some other persons.
Yeah, I mean, I am not denying that, it's a fraudulent attempt, and I am sure that you do your job very well. But I'm just asking, giving you these questions. Are they really authorized? If you're going to go to the next level, so governance, if you're going to make, say tomorrow you need to implement, say, CyberArk or any other PAM solution in a different organization. I'm just giving you a different role. If you have to design, what is going to be the workflow? What level of access should each person get? Just because someone asks for admin and it is, approved by, whatever is the process flow in your organization or workflow, is that really the right way? How do you look at the logs just to see that I know CyberArk and many other PAM solutions, I don't know whether you have video recording, but they do log what actions the cybersecurity or the administrator did by using that, the privilege session. So how are you going to, if you go to the SOC level, you're going to do analysis, and how are you going to draw inferences from that? You might look at maybe, have you looked at the, from a pure IT perspective, what is the utilization of the PAM system? Can you, create more IDs, or, how do you manage the requirements? So, I know I'm not giving you a straight answer, Venkata, but you do get the direction I'm giving you in terms of, food for thought. Have you ever questioned, yes, they're authorized people from the organization, but do they really require access? Say typically, if you're looking at a temporary access to say production, you will typically, and if I remember, you will have a times period that they've requested access. Is that tied to your CCF change process? Because I believe that, as part of the change process, it is approved. But if the change required is only for, change timeline is only for say 3 hours, why are they requesting for 8 hours? Yes, 4 hours I can understand for any, overflows or something, but why 8 hours? That is where the compliance, and it might be post facto that you are analyzing. Now pick up the change request and see what the requests are. Simple example I'll give you. Are they really matching in terms of, especially when you have temporary access requests? Are there significant differences? Then you can raise it as a concern, and how do you tighten the process? That's it. You're complying with the access management requirement, which is one of the pillars. Right? So you're managing the technology from a CyberArk perspective. You're also managing the people and looking at the process. And compliance, ultimately, to drill it down very low, is ultimately having an overview of these three things work together properly. Hope that answers your question or gives you a direction, Venkata.
Venkata, can you unmute yourself? I've given you the permission. All right. So I think we are dot 8. My last question to you for the session is a power tip for a fresher, a power tip for somebody who's in the industry trying to excel. Just 2 tips which would really be helpful for the participants who've been there today.
See, one, from a tip perspective, you need to have an open mind because, like I said earlier, if you're going to look at information security purely from a technology lens, you're missing out on 2 big areas, which is the process and, the people perspective. Because process, let's move away from cybersecurity. If you're a process engineer, why don't you do business process re-engineering? That's one more, not exactly with the compliance this one, but that's a career option you have, so you can branch out. You can get out of, cybersecurity is only one set of processes. From a larger organization, there are multiple processes you can look at. Now, if you're looking at from a process certification point of view, you can look at ISO 9001. Venkata, again, I think we need to Now you will need to answer your specific question, you will need to look at these kind of opportunities and then grow up from that. Like I said, it is not a quick switch that you can do because organizations tend to be pretty siloed. But you can look at the these kind of opportunities, because some of these access requirements, just to take you in one more direction, I sorry, it's it's a, I won't say a vague answer, but it's giving you so many options that you can think of. These access requirements are managed by the maybe contractual requirement. Again, depends on what kind of company you are. What level of access do you, I mean, I'm not talking about privileged access, but when user access level. Why do everyone require access to everything at the same level? Now, that is a basic premise of a PAM, which is targeted at a specific set of users who are in, at the privileged access level. Why do they? I mean, you are looking at questions like why do they require it? Do they really require it for that long? Is there a way to optimize the process? Again, these are very difficult questions to answer because they are dependent on the organization policy, their culture, and which is why you need to have some amount of patience to push some of these requirements through, because if by bettering the process you need a change of technology, there are budgetary approvals, there are legal contractual approvals that you're looking at. So this is how you'll need to look at various options and see what interests you, because ultimately you need to grow and you need to look at learn new things. Only then you will be well-rounded. Because there are some people who like the IAM space. There's nothing wrong with that, but then you can grow with maybe larger organization managing the entire IAM function, which many organizations have as a separate silo. Or are you looking at a overall process level? Because that's where compliance comes in. Technology, yes, is enabling. So you might audit that and say, yes, this process or requirement is being complied to. But what is required? How is it being done? Either it's going to be a technology, it's going to be a people or people requirement, or it's going to be a process requirement. And again, the line from cybersecurity blurs with the overall organization, because if your organization or whatever business requires people on the front line, there is nothing you can do to make them remote work, or how can you enable them, especially with this COVID scenario. Does it require a change of process? Most likely, yes. How are you going to manage, attendance or whatever? And so these are various questions you need to think through. Again, sorry, it's not a straight answer, especially when compliance is concerned, because there are so many requirements you'll need to balance, and you'll need to come to one, mutually acceptable level, and that varies with organization, where you're functioning, what is the culture. If you're just going to put up a proposal saying that we need to change the process, you are more likely to be rejected for that. But you need to come up with solid reasons why that needs to be done. So PAM, so Venkata, to addressing to you, because you're managing PAM, CyberArk is there. Are you actually, let me put a very simple question. This comes up with internal audit. The licenses do you have? I believe CyberArk is licensed by user. Are there really in so many licenses required? Because they will vary with as people come in and go in and out of your organization. Now, I know there is a minimum 1 year, this one before you can renew, but you are looking at when you're renewing the licenses, do we need to take more licenses? Again, that depends on your business organization, business plans, or less licenses, because not everyone requires access. What is the count? How many sessions you need to manage will define. Yes, but how do you know what is the business requirement? Venkata, to your specific question in the chat. Okay, you don't need to answer that. It's just a question you need to think on. So I believe you will be giving some analysis to your, to the powers that be to make that decision to, ensure. Okay. Why have you looked at the client and saying, how do you really require so many licenses? I'm not countering every point you make, but these are the things you need to think of. I think, Venkata, I've given you a direction. We can discuss. You can put in place your questions. Maybe Kaushik, if you can enable that, I can answer them.
Yep, sure, sir. Venkata, what I'd recommend is you can put your questions out here, or you can email it to the support@antwalk.com website, and we'll try to relay it with our expert to get you the answer.
Yep.
Once again, thank you so much, sir, for have gone extended the time beyond. And I'm pretty sure compliance being a pretty much like a tough topic to make.
It's tough and ambiguous to a large extent.
True,
Which is why you
absolutely.
need to be on the ball.
Absolutely. So I think there have been quite a few people who've answered, and the queries have also gone through as well. So once again, thanks for all who have attended the function. Request you to check out that link that I've shared in the chat. Also, thank you so much, sir, for today's.
Thanks, Kaushik and the Antwerp team.
We look forward to more sessions from you in the.
Sure.
Once again, thanks again for everybody. You have a good night. Take care, sir. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.